Today in the video I want to touch on some points that I think will be pretty important for you as we are sorting through the wide world of data. Okay? Data is really the heart of what you're going to start to look at to see what you actually learned from your science fair experiment. There's going to be lots of things that you learned just generally by going through the process, but really pushing yourself forward into looking at what you did and what actually happened to see if there's a cause and effect relationship going on there is going to come from looking at the data a little bit more carefully and a little bit more closely. Now there's going to be two ways that you can show and showcase your data on your trifold boards. The first way is to actually just say hi, Hugh. The first way is actually just to create the data tables yourself, okay, on paper using graph paper, doing it really nice and neat with color pencils, markers, so that it's nice and legible. The second way would be to use computers. Okay, I'm going to talk about some hints and tips, okay, for doing it the old-fashioned way and for doing it using Excel. The first thing that I want to say, however, is that part of your requirement to have on your trifold board is to have one data table and one graph. Okay. Other than that, the more that you put out there, the more shows me how in-depth you are actually able to go with your project and what you understood about it. But a big part of that is actually making sure that you use the right type of graph to showcase the data that you collected. First, I want to take a moment and talk about data tables. So I want you to take a look at this.
It all begins with the data table. And so what I have here on the computer screen is a data table that is already set up. And before you even start and begin your experiment, make sure that you have your data table organized. This will help you in the long run. Even if you're just organizing it in your lab notebook first, you can easily transfer it over to your lab notebook if your data is organized to start with. And so what I really want you to think about, and you'll go back to your research proposal to do this, is what are your two variables? You have your independent variable that you're going to change and your dependent variable that you're going to measure. And so what I recommend is that you set up and you put on the far left side of your data table what it is you are changing. And so in this experiment, they are changing the size of the holes through different can sizes, and they're going to be measuring, as it says here on the top, the number of spins. That's what this data table is all about. And so columns going on the right side are where our dependent variable information is at. Now this last column is a bonus column, and that is where we are going to be given some or calculating out some information to help the people that are listening and trying to understand our science fair project, to give them a snapshot of what your experiment means. Once you have completed your experiment, you need to have your data table filled in. And it is critically important as you are being organized. Again, the things that you are changing is on the left side. That's our independent variable. We have a title on the top that explains what it is and the type of data that we're collecting. And on the right are the things that we have been measuring, so our dependent variable. And what I want you to note is something very specific here. Specifically the titles to my dependent variable columns. What I have here is I explain what it is that I'm testing or what I'm measuring or collecting, and especially if you have two people in your group, you need to have more data. And so I have here that we are collecting the mass, and I am going to do that in grams. Now you might wonder, why don't I just put a G down here? That's because if I were to add labels next to the numbers, when I go to make my graph, and let's say I wanted to make my graph on the computer, and that's an option that all of you have, the computer won't be able to recognize that. So if I had 136 grams here, I would not be able to make a graph of this information. If I highlighted it and I went to my charts, or I think it's under insert for you, and I wanted to make a column graph of this, guess what? It didn't give me the bronze cube information. I don't know if you can see that or not, it's quite small. Guess what? it didn't give me the bronze cube information because it had this G behind it. If I were to go back in and change and take away that G, and then go back and change up my column graph, here we go. We want to make sure that we honor that the computer does not read letters. It just recognizes that it's a letter. It recognizes numbers and can be able to create beautiful graphs for us, but we have to give them that option. And that's important to note and remember as we are working together to put in our graphs, which is the next step once we have all of our data put together. So since we're on this topic, I want to talk a little bit about how your graphs and tables, mainly your graphs, should be formatted. When you go and you have your data table set up, you want to have no letters behind the numbers so that it can read it. You want to be able to highlight everything that you want to graph. Then you want to choose what type of graph you want to make. But let's say I wanted to make a column graph about it. So I click on column and I choose which one I want to do. And it automatically gives me a graph that looks like this. Now this graph is okay, however, if I were to put this on my science fair poster and people were to just walk up and I wasn't by my trifold, it doesn't really tell them very much information. And so what I would recommend is going back up, and it will look a little different on a PC, but up here there is the chart layouts. And as you look for this, I would recommend looking for one that looks like this, because this will give you a title, which is why there's grayed out here. It's going to give you labels on the X and Y axis, and it's going to give you a key on the side. So if I click on it, it gives me this information. And this is a much better representation of how and gives your learner who is going to learn from you some feedback. And you can just easily go in here and add in your title to your graph, your X and Y axis, and you have a key that also separates this out. Now, I want to show you one more thing here because I'm not super thrilled with the way that it looks. Now, on the PC, it's going to look a little bit different, but I clicked and I said that I wanted to switch the series, the way that the computer reads the information. And when I did that, you can see that it has them all grouped by their columns here. But if I switch it, it's going to have it grouped by the independent variable, which is a very interesting way to think about it and look at it because you can look at each different variable that you changed in a very specific way. So hopefully some of these tips give you some good ideas about how to set up your graph. You want to have a title, labels, and ideally a key if you're showing more than one thing on your graph. Lastly, I want to give a shout out to a specific type of graph because what I typically get from 8th graders is a lot of 8th graders want to just make column graphs. And column or bar graphs are great graphs, don't get me wrong, they are very appropriate in many situations, but a graph that some students don't like to use or don't use enough of is the line graph. And so if I were to go up here and make a line graph, oh, oops, look, I didn't actually highlight the information before I chose the graph. So my graph ended up to be blank. And so if you have that problem, double check to make sure that you have highlighted your information first. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to highlight everything that I want to have a graph made of. And again, note that I have no labels behind my numbers. And I'm going to click on line and let's try this again. The line graph is an awesome graph to use when you are focusing on things over time. Again, I'm going to go in and I'm going to change my layout here so that I have a title on the top, labels on my X and Y axis, and a key on the side. So to wrap it up, what I'd like to focus on is that data displayed on your science fair trifold is really, really critical and important to helping your audience understand where you're coming from. Make sure that it is clearly displayed. Make sure that it actually displays information that you want people to know that you're actually going to base your conclusions on, and make sure that it's nice and clean and neat. It will help you, and it will help your audience to better understand your science fair project. So good luck, keep it up, and I can't wait to see what you create.